Welcome and thank you all for signing up on Zoom, and it's also gone live on Facebook and YouTube, I believe, as well. Most of all, I'd like to welcome and thank Martin Hayes for agreeing to do this for us. It's a very strange time for artists all around the world, and we in the Irish Traditional Music Archive we just launched this new series, Drawing from the Well, with the aim of connecting artists with archival material to inspire new art. And we're very conscious at the moment there's none of the normal interactions between artists and at festivals or sessions or concerts or tours. And I suppose it underlines the importance and a vacuum that can be filled by archival recordings and the inspiration we get from the past. And no better person than Martin Hayes to bring us through that process and to explain how he finds inspiration in archival recordings. Martin is one of the musicians in Irish music who you can genuinely say needs no introduction. He's world renowned. He's deeply rooted in the music of Clare, and he's a forensic knowledge of the tradition, and having grown up in a family steeped in music and in an area in East Clare steeped in music, his interests are deeply rooted, but are very varied and diverse as well. And so delighted to have you on board, Martin.
Thank you, Liam. Delighted to be here. And and like when you introduced this idea to me some time ago, it was a very attractive idea anyway, because I like that connection with archival material and with old musicians is something that's kind of driven my whole musical life, really. And even though I've done a lot of things that you wouldn't think are connected to that, they all are, in fact, in my mind, directly connected to that experience. And so just that, I mean, I found tremendous value in I was listening to the music that was being played just before we came on air there, as it were, while we were waiting. And, you can hear this rugged, raw expression of music. And I think maybe to the uninitiated ear, it's a bit off-putting at first, because you don't really know what are you supposed to be hearing in this, and how are you supposed to even listen to it. What I did in preparation for this was I made a little short video. Well, I meant to make a short video. I meant it to be about 10 minutes, but it somehow clocked in at around 18 minutes or something like that, And it we chose. Alan had sent me some material from the archive of musicians that, of course, I already knew, and I had some of their music in my own kind of personal archive, as it were. And so the three musicians were Martin Rochford, John Knox, and Junior Krahen, all three Clare musicians, and two of them were, of course, East Clare, but my Junior Krahen is from West Clare. And people make distinctions between quote unquote East Clare and West Clare, and I suppose there are distinctions to be made. But I remember at a young age saying, I don't think I'm really going to go down that road 100%, because I do like what Junior Krahen and Bobby Casey and Joe Ryan are doing over there as well, and I'm not going to turn a deaf ear to that, So that all fed into the kind of ecosystem, I suppose, the various strands of musical ideas that kind of fed into what I do at this stage musically. So I suppose maybe rather than waffling on too much, maybe, Alan, I suppose it might make sense to line up that little film if you have it there. And so if you can bear with us for a while and sit back and just enjoy this, it'll leave us with something to discuss, I think, afterwards. So.
Lovely stuff. So here is a video that Martin very kindly took time to make, and so just give me a second to pop up on the screen here.
June and all the family send their regards to Bobby, and they're sorry that he wasn't home for the flower, so they hope to see and hear him sometime soon again.
I consider the idea of an archive a very important one when it comes to this music. I grew up actually assembling an archive, in a sense. I had my stack of cassettes, my collection of records, and the people that I knew, of course. Well, I won't include them as archival material, but they were some of the same people I'm going to introduce you to now. But what I remember doing was, like, whenever I had an opportunity, I would tape record these musicians. And there were plenty of parties and gatherings in our house where I was able to do that. And so that became my kind of go-to thing, you know, like I would sit down and go, I'm going to learn a new tune. And because I had taped a lot of local musicians, and a lot of the local tunes weren't that common, and the ways of interpreting those tunes and the variants of those tunes were uncommon, I kind of delved myself into that, realizing that, you know, the stuff that I was gathering myself was quite a valuable resource. Well, as it turns out, you know, all of the things I did, you know, are now freely available in the Traditional Music Archive. Now, some of the same tunes that I recorded were recorded by other people and stuff like that, so it's well covered. Which means that the same well that I was going to when I was learning to play and when I was getting my sense of this music is now freely available to everybody, which is great. So why is it so important? I'll tell you. If you, for example, like were a fiddle player and you were interested in the way I played the fiddle, you know, so you would, you know, get my recordings and learn from them and listen from them. But no matter how much you learned or listened to my recordings, you would still be missing crucial information in terms of how I play. Because you actually would need to know, truly, where I'm getting this from. Listening to the Botti Band wouldn't be enough. Listening to the Gloaming certainly wouldn't be enough. So what I would say is, listen to what those people listen to. I mean, Matt Malloy was listening to all kinds of people, as was Sean Keane, as was, you know, you name it, all the musicians in those bands and stuff had a connection, you know, like Liam O'Flynn would have been deeply connected to the music of Seamus Ennis and Willie Clancy. So it's important to kind of go through those source materials in order to build your sense of the knowledge and get where all the diversities, you know, create a kind of a, I'll use the word kind of a biodiverse, you know, I know that's a word pertaining to the natural environment, but in terms of music, I like having that diversity is very important, you know, otherwise everything just eventually narrows down to one way of playing the fiddle and one way of playing the flute in this music, and we don't want that to happen. We want people to be able to embrace just the wider range of possible influences out there. In fact, the biggest challenge that you'll have is that there is so much information as to decide where to start with this. Now, I can't necessarily help you with that, but who knows, maybe it could be from listening to one of your favorite musicians in a more modern recording, and you just, you know, do a bit of research and seek out who they may have listened to. And eventually you'll find that you can work your way back through like a chain link all the way back to various influences that would have driven this, like all the way back to old 78 recordings of different flute players, fiddle players, whatnot. So that the archive is very important from that point of view. Listen to some of the recordings, you know, it's kind of, you know, if you're used to the glitz and the refined and the nicely mastered EQ'd sounds that you get with modern recordings, then it's going to be a bit problematic listening to stuff that is rough and raw and sometimes unfinished. And that's not to dismiss or diminish in any way what's contained in that material, and I'm going to get to that in a little while. It'd be fair to say in this music that there's a deficit of language to describe and properly express the value inherent in the music of people like Martin Rochford and Junior Krahen and John Knox, for example. I found language that helps express and explain this music in a very beautiful way. And oddly enough, this kind of language of aesthetics that I'm speaking about comes from Japan, and it's called Wabisabi. And it's a language that identifies things that have a natural quality, a worn quality, a quality of imperfection, but truthfulness and honesty. Like this fiddle here, like has wabi-sabi qualities here because it's you can see little imperfections that have been woven into the instrument over the years. It has the feeling of being used. Like these qualities exhibit a kind of warmth as opposed to a coldness. It's the feeling of being in a Buddhist temple as opposed to like a Burger King. Like the feelings you get from these places are so radically different. One is all plastic, has not one iota of a wabi-sabi naturalness quality to it, whereas the other is essentially just that. Trying to understand music in the context of electronic music, in the context of classical music that has been auto-tuned and edited to the nth, so that there's not one human error detectable in the music. Even in traditional music, we've reached a level of technical refinement that is like, on recordings, that's actually you don't really hear in live performance as much. And so we have, obviously the standards around the playing of music have increased dramatically. And the skill level of musicians playing traditional music are, off the charts now compared to where they were. But I'm not necessarily sure that the deeper qualities have progressed at the same level. And what I think is hidden within this archive is this deeper language and knowledge, this deeper world of feeling and expression. And that is what we have to listen for inside the music in this archive. And the language of wabi-sabi gives us a framework, a way of thinking about the qualities that are important in this music. And I think it's important when we're listening to these musicians to be able to gradually decipher the intention, to gradually decipher the shape of the melody that they're wishing to express, that the feeling, the intention, the aspiration, the general interpretation are hugely important and carry huge weight, and are, if we only listen very casually or superficially, we generally miss this. And this is where the real substance is. And if there was any lacking area in the world of traditional music, it probably is in that realm. There are not as many junior Crahens now as there were. And when Junior played, yes, there were imperfections in his playing, of course, but they were natural, they were normal, they were human, they were completely in keeping with who he was. He aspired to be nothing more than Junior Krahen, to be himself, to play with feeling, from feeling, to communicate feeling. And that he did perfectly. And so there was in his music this warmth, this softness, this sweet melancholy. And I just like, just the gentle nature of his being. I mean, he was a bit of a rogue as well, but there was a gentle nature in him nonetheless that came out in his music, and which was a very beautiful thing. Martin Rochford was also one of those musicians that had just a beautiful soulfulness in the way he played, both on the fiddle and the pipes. But and like on this archival recording, like I don't think he stopped to tune the fiddle. It's in some other pitch, and obviously the G string is just way out. And I think he was probably tuning down for effect or something like that, or trying to make the fiddle warm and sweet. But anyway, he was probably reckless about that. But the truth was, he recognized the subtlety in a melody and the beautiful note. And I mean, he often talked to me about, there's a lovely note here in this part of the tune. And so he had that understanding and feeling. When John Naughton came around the place, he had only recently reacquired a concertina after having not played for almost all of his life. So he was kind of like a time capsule that came back to East Clare, playing the music of his childhood when he was perhaps now an old man in the mid to late 70s. And I was there with my tape recorder capturing as much of that as I could. And I hear all of the same tunes I got. They're already in the music archive, so everybody has access to it now. But John Naughton had like just this natural, beautiful humility as a human being, and he didn't have a sense of himself as being an important or significant musician in any way. He just played, and I think just being in a position where you simply play and you don't have a point to prove and you're not trying to prove a point, and you just allow your own creative process to engage with this, well, I think that's a beautiful thing, and something very valuable arises in that kind of process. And the tune I've just picked here for the archive is a tune that I went on to record myself. So I'll play John Naughton playing this tune, and I'll just give you a little sense of the recording that I made afterwards, which is really, I'm just playing the tune as I heard it from John, you know, and
Lovely stuff. Thanks very much, Martin. Lots of great thoughts and insights into the music and some of the musicians that inspired Martin over the years. And I'm going to hand it over to our director, Liam O'Connor, to get the conversation going with Martin. But just to say before that at this stage now we're going to start welcoming questions from people who in the crowd, so to speak. And again, we encourage you to, if you're part of the Zoom call, we encourage you to type your questions into the chat tab, and then also if you're watching on YouTube, you can submit your questions there in the chat tab, and also you can comment underneath the video on Facebook either, and we will be keeping an eye out on all those platforms for your questions. So I'll hand you over to our director, Liam O'Connor.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Thanks so much, Martin. That was a fascinating piece of work, and very, very insightful and thought-provoking. I really enjoyed well, so much aspects of it, but the language, I think, was very insightful as well. And I think it could be a very useful tool for listeners, and for something that I'd love to see embedded in the education system in Ireland too. You know, that often it's quite a challenge for people to, and for traditional musicians to articulate what the inherent beauty of recordings and maybe technically imperfect performances can mean for us. And so yeah, that was fascinating. So moving from Tokyo to Tulla as well, I was curious myself, Martin. Your own father, PJ Hayes, and uncle, of course, Paddy Canny, such giants of the tradition. And I'm conscious too that you knew a lot of these. You had first-hand experiences of these great tradition bearers, and you're very much one yourself as well. Was there, growing up in your household, was there a tradition of listening to recordings even right back then, even when there was such a rich tradition around?
Oh yeah, I mean there was. I mean recordings made up a big part of my life, like it does for everybody else, and it made up a big part of my father's life as well, and Paddy Canny, because my father talked about the first gramophone that arrived from America, as they usually did, and like he was so excited by this. This was like on another plane of reality altogether. Like, and he set it up, and the first thing that went was some kind of band or something broke inside it immediately before he got to play any recording. And he cycled all the way to Limerick, like 23 or 4 miles away into the city and back, just to get that. He just went immediately. And so recordings have been like a part of it, for a long time. And even when I was a kid, like my dad and I used to, there were few enough radio programs, for example, so we would sit and listen to every one of them. We just sat there quietly in the room and listened to the radio programs of traditional music at the time. And there were a few television programs that we listened to as well. And I watched, I should say. But also my father used to buy records, like for me. Now like at this stage, like parents can't buy clothing for kids, and never mind choose their music. But my father would buy me records in Ennis, and I'd come home with them, and I'd be thrilled. I'd be waiting for these records, So we sat around and listened to them, and some of them only got 2 tracks in, and we put them back in the sleeve and never again listened to them. Like the judgment would be made fast. And like if this music wasn't speaking a language that made sense to us, it went back in the cover. And there's actually a few musicians who I gave some recordings to my dad and I years ago, LPs, and I looked like 15 years later, 20 years later, and the plastic still hadn't been opened. And so, like, there was a household of significantly strong opinions about what constituted real music and what wasn't, So yes, that we did listen to lots of recordings, and it was part of my growing up. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Have you any advice for that balance between, say, a modern musician growing up now learning traditional music, and maybe some a lot of maybe teaching or resources or help in the way of technical proficiency and with a modern mindset, and how would they balance that and embrace the imperfection of the Wabisabi that you spoke about, and how do they do that in a way that's not contrived but natural? What is your advice on striking that balance, I suppose?
Well, the funny thing is, we have that understanding in many areas of life. You try giving a kid a pair of jeans that are now worn, and they object immediately. They have a liking for the worn pair of jeans, and like obviously the commercial into the market understood this fairly soon, that the people didn't have the patience to wear them that far themselves, so they got them worn. So why do we like worn jeans? It's really the same thing. Or why do, when we go into an antique store and we see the wear on the table, and it's immediately appealing to us. In fact, we'd be very distrustful if it didn't have this wear and tear on it. And even when modern violins are being made, I'm sure you've seen this, Liam, so you go in and so you see all these marks have been worn into it, like, kind of here and there. And you go, I thought this was a new fiddle. Oh yes, it's been antiqued. Because like we won't accept the fiddle as being credible if it's just completely shiny surface. We're suspicious of it almost. And I mean, another way of thinking about this old music and these old recordings and this old way of hearing is to like imagine what a restoration architect does when they see a building, when they see a home like you want to strip back to the original materials, for example. So we see lots of this going on in the world now, where we see old cabinets that were painted with 10 layers of paint, and we realized that we need to get back to the wood, and we need to get to the stone that was in the front. We need to get the pebble dash off and get back to the stone. There's a sense, if you take that sense or that way of looking at the world, there's a way in which when you look at these recordings, you begin to see the skeletal shape of the melody underneath, and you're not so worried about the arthritic hand that actually failed to deliver the perfection, because I became far more interested in the idea underlying the piece of melody that was being expressed than actually like evaluating the result itself. So moving into the area of musical intention, moving into the area of kind of melodic shape, as it were, in terms of what this musician is hearing or imagining. And so I always felt that in my own kind of connection to the tradition, that understanding intention and aspiration was equally important to sitting down and hearing the recordings. So some combination of reflection, thought, dialogue, conversation, teaching around that is important, so we can begin to understand where some of these people are coming from. And they weren't all equal. Not every old person who played the fiddle in a scratchy way was the same. They were not. Martin Rochford was, like, for example, you wouldn't necessarily think it, but from even listening to him, but he was quite a good reader of music. And he used to just run through manuscripts from all over England and Scotland and Ireland, everywhere.
Some issues with your sound, Martin. I think we might just wait for a moment. I think Martin's screen is after freezing, and his audio has gone out as well. So
while we're waiting there, Alan, I might just explain to people as well that Martin is based in Spain at the moment and accessing. We're doing all this remotely as well during. Oh, you're back, Martin, are you?
Yeah.
Martin's back.
I'm back. Am I back now?
You're back.
Yeah. There was some kind of internet there or something. Yeah. Well, the universe will cut me off because somebody needs to stop me talking sometimes, So I like to give people a chance to ask questions and interact,
That's brilliant, Martin. I have one short question for my own curiosity too. Just in terms of when you're actually practicing now, I know conscious for some people are born in tradition like yourself, and then other people will be trying to learn the tradition, I suppose, and particularly in times like this, would be dependent on recordings. What's your process for if you hear something in an archival recording that a tune that you think, oh, you know what, I'll learn that, or I see something in that? Is it a subconscious process that you just listen to it in the background and in time it comes out, or is it a direct sit down conscious effort, or what's your process, I suppose?
Well, actually, kind of both of those processes, really. Like sometimes I just sit down and listen to tunes, and like the next, 2 days later, I'm whistling the tune and I'm going, oh yeah, that tune was good, and I'm back there, so I already basically know it. And sometimes I just like go straight at it, and just simply play it back. I mean, I used to do it on a record player at one stage, where I would lift the needle, bring it back and try and land in the sweet spot between the tracks there, and not destroy the record. But I did that. I envy people who live in the world of amazing slow downer and various things like that now to make it so easy. But one of the things I do, I suppose, in learning a tune is I do a little bit like the restoration architect here. I scale the tune back to the very basic melody. I just go back to the very basic bones of the tune. And I try not to absorb other people's ornamentation or variations necessarily. So I'm interested in the tune, which was something that, like, when talking with the older players that I knew growing up, these musicians, like, the tune was paramount, and they were obsessed with finding melodies. they didn't care who was playing them or how they were being played. They just wanted to get melody so badly that they actually learned how to read music, many of them, Paddy Kenny and Martin Rochford included, just to get tunes, nothing else,
Fascinating there. That's brilliant. Alan, do you want to open up there to some of the? Sure,
Yeah,
there's plenty of questions arriving in there.
yeah. Well, I'll open up first with a couple of comments that have come in. And Mary Alton on YouTube has said, "We are loving the Wabisabi description of the musicians and recordings. Thank you." And then here on Zoom, Mairead Collins said, "Thank you, Martin. As a novice concertina player, I always find you so encouraging." Mairead Collins, Fremont in Cork. So one of the first questions I have here comes from Fran Torgwen on YouTube, and it's, Martin, who influenced the people that influenced you, and where did it start? So I guess, do you know much about the people who came before Martin Rochford and Joe Ban and your dad? And if you do, maybe you can speak a little bit about them.
Yeah, I could. I mean, like in the case of my father's music, and my uncle Paddy Kenny, for example, we stay close to the family here. My grandmother would have been a concertina player. My father's mother was a concertina player as well, and I suppose not an amazing concertina player by today's standards, but just one of these. It was almost like baking bread and cooking dinners and stuff like that. She could pull down the concertina and play for somebody to dance as well, so it was almost that level of utility, and it was true that the concertina was ubiquitous in Clare, and there was actually a little spot built into the wall beside the fireplace where the concertinas were left, and so it was just a necessary tool in the house, for that kind of life. And but the main teacher in the locality was Paddy Kenny's father, Pat Kenny. So in a sense, like when you listen to Paddy Kenny, you're listening to the, at least the echo, I think, somewhat of his father. And but then you have to factor in, as time went on, they started listening to Michael Coleman and James Morrison, so that had an impact. And I think later in the case with Paddy Kenny, he fell under the spell of Tommy Potts, and then you could hear the sound of Tommy Potts coming out in his playing. At least I could anyway when I was young. It was like a kind of a flavour that I was beginning to, the only place I could source it was Tommy Potts, I didn't hear it anywhere else, So like they were absorbing influences kind of laterally as well, in their own time. And it was a kind of a filtration process down from, what he would have learned from his father, Pat Kenny, and beyond that, I really can't tell, who's who, and I don't know how anybody sounded, and that kind of thing. So, but it was all that. I mean, there was limited teaching going on, in a sense, and basically what people thought were the tunes. And so the technical aspects of how to play an instrument there was very little of that teaching. And so you just kind of absorbed and imitated and watched and learned and just kind of made your own way through it in a certain sense. You kind of had to feel like you had to teach yourself how to play the fiddle, basically, while watching other people do it, so it was that kind of a thing.
And that might tie in with a question here from Breach Barker, who's asking about the arrival of gramophone records. And is there a possibility that gramophone records had an impact on the generation of musicians before your dad's generation?
Oh yeah, but they kind of came in like my father was. They would have, but I suppose they became more widely available in Ireland in the 30s and 40s, So it impacted that generation. I mean, for example, like some musicians had their style was largely formed before these recordings. Like according to like. For example, I feel that Junior Krahen already had formed his style before being influenced by any of the gramophone recordings. And I think Patrick Kelly from Cree recorded music.
Sorry, Martin, there's just some interruption on your line there again. And maybe if you could just repeat that last point you made, because the line was breaking up. I think you're back. The camera looks a little glitchy again.
Yeah, I really don't know what the story is, but anyway.
Yeah, your connection is fractured again there.
God, I don't really know what that is, but I think that it's.
Now.
Am I back again?
Yeah. But okay, that's a fair point anyway. You believe a lot of those musicians had their style formed.
Yeah, some of them did, but the gramophone recordings. I mean, I actually used that gramophone machine myself. Like I had 78s, and I found a whole batch of them in an aunt's attic in Portumna. And that's where I found all these recordings with Paddy Cronin, for example, whom I loved. And I taught Paddy Cronin, like nobody told me anything. I didn't know anything about this Paddy Cronin, but I had his recordings, I had Morrison's, and I assumed that everybody on a 78 recording was already dead. And I remember getting to Boston some years later with the Tulla Band and being introduced to Paddy Cronin and being realised he's alive. Oh, holy God! I thought they were all dead, but anyway, they weren't. And but I loved Paddy Cronin's recordings. In fact, I was more drawn to them than I was to Michael Coleman and James Morrison at the time. I recall. And so yes, the 78 recordings. You know, do you know what's nice about them? The lack of absolute sonic clarity puts you in a situation where you can actually hear completely how they sounded. Meaning that your imagination actually has to fill in the gaps. And you sit there and you begin to imagine the more complete sound of Michael Coleman or James Morrison or Paddy Cronin, as it were. You know, and I found that there was, in a funny way, a deeper reality to the experience of listening to a 78 recording than there is to listening to a CD. It's just, you know, it's a bit of a trick of the mind in a way, because we actually, the 78 invites you to a more conscious engagement with the music, you know, where your imagination is more drawn to the process, and you actually have to fill out inside your mind and your mind's ear how this sound really is in a complete sense, you know. So there's something very lovely about this.
Your line's breaking up again. Sorry, Martin. And
well, I actually stopped talking there. For once.
Oh, sorry. I've got multiple screens going on here, actually. So I had the YouTube. Yeah. But and just one final maybe point on records and their potential influence or impact of them. Martin Donoghue would like to know, how did you and your dad react to the early broadcasts and recordings of Sean McGuire?
Well, to be honest, I would say that they weren't a big fan. Having said that, like, it's undeniable his skill and his ability, and he had actually, I suppose, to be fair to the man, he was operating at a skill level that basically none of the rest of them were operating at. Like, so that's to give him his fair due. But I wouldn't think that Junior Krahen really thought that this is what the music was about. And so I would have felt that the sense among that group of musicians was that the more subtle quality of it was still the more significant and more important part of it. And so, in a sense, McGuire was a very showy kind of player, a virtuosic kind of demonstration of capabilities, and of course, I suppose if one doesn't possess that kind of level of skill, it's easy to complain about it, you know. But on the other hand, I am of the opinion that Irish music is not really a great venue for that level of virtuosity. I think, I do think the Bakshakone can challenge you more in that area, and if virtuosity is what you want, there's plenty of avenues to pursue it. I think that the deeper qualities of this music are a little more subtle, and at least that was the viewpoint in Clare at the time anyway, among the older musicians. So like that lonesome note, that sweet note, that melancholic beauty was something that they were seeking pretty constantly, as far as I could make out.
Well, that leads on perfectly to a question here on YouTube from, if I can find it again, and actually here on Zoom, from Ryan Young. And he says that he thinks he read somewhere that Martin Rochford encouraged you to play in darker keys like G minor and C minor, etc. Could you speak a little bit about that, please?
Well, it was true. Martin Rochford did do that. He was, for example, there's no question that when you listen to classical music, if you won't hear a requiem written in the key of A, for example. A requiem, will tend to be a minor, and so Martin Rochford had identified like that. The key of F, or C had more melancholic qualities than D or G, for example, or B flat. So he would often knew that I was playing a particular tune, and he'd say, "Did you ever think of dropping that down one?" And he, instead of transposing, he didn't use the word transpose, or he didn't even name the key. He just said, "Drop it down one," which he meant by start one note lower, on the instrument, which I would, and it did introduce a whole other world of feeling, because each key is, in a sense, a world of feeling unto itself, and so when you move the tune into another key, it's it changes quite a lot. So like it could be. I mean, they start you out in two different worlds of feeling entirely. So Martin Rochford was onto something there for sure, But yes, I after I would learn a tune, I would transpose it into a variety of keys, just as a matter of form every time, just to see which one gave me something, or not,
Yeah. We've got a question here from Emer Hart, and she says, "I'm here with my 8-year-old girl who has just started the wonderful journey of learning Irish traditional music, the fiddle. What advice do you have as she starts out? She is lacking the patience and wants to progress quicker. I tell her to take it slow. Long-time fan, novice player too, really enjoying the presentation. Overall advice to young musicians, please."
Well, I mean, advice to young musicians, maybe advice to parents of young musicians. Don't make anybody play music, because it doesn't work. I mean, the whole world has been trying to do that for a long time, so that doesn't work. But giving children lots of opportunity to hear and experience and become interested and drawn to it, like, is a hugely valuable thing. And giving the opportunity and giving lots of encouragement for people when they do play. And to that 8-year-old that's playing, I started when I was 7, and I don't know about you, but I made terrible progress. Like I was, by the age of 11, I still had only a handful of tunes I could play, so I really didn't make much progress at all. And so I'm strong evidence for the fact that, like, I had no innate skill or talent beyond that of anybody else, because if that was the case, it would have shown up, and it didn't show up at all. Like, not till I knuckled down for a long time and just decided to get serious about it, But I mean, I would say, just be patient and be happy to play slowly. In fact, I give that advice to just about anybody playing music, is to avoid that rush, avoid the need or the feeling to have to accomplish dexterous speed on the instrument. It really gets in your way. Make things sound complete slowly, and then you will get there. And so just be patient, and it all comes to you. I remember Paddy Canny visiting the house one time, and I was struggling with the process of making a triplet on the bow, and I asked Paddy Canny, I says, how do you think I should do that? And he goes, Jammers, they'll come to you.
Yeah.
And that was it. There was no more information. He showed me nothing whatsoever. Only assured me they would come to me, you know. So it'll come to you. Don't you worry.
And Siobhan English, she says, as someone starting out on the journey of learning and loving traditional music, it is wonderful to hear such fantastic insights into our musical heritage. Thank you so much. So many things to take away and reflect on. And then Susan says, thank you for your thoughts on 78s. When first starting to play Irish music, I thought there was one way to play a tune. Now, after listening to records of the same tune, I will try some 78s. You are such an inspiration. And then I'll go back to some of the questions and comments on YouTube. And there is Connor Toole has, Martin, what are your thoughts on shows like The Pure Drop? You think there is a future for those kinds of broadcasts featuring older masters of the tradition?
Oh, I certainly hope so. I mean, I loved those television programs and even radio programs like growing up. Like they were a huge part of what drew me in. You know, I remember like watching the early broadcasts of Tony McMahon, for example, when he would play on that. And I was like maybe 5 or 6 years of age. And I remember watching Tony McMahon and being completely enthralled by his playing, even at that age, you know, and just like looking forward to when he would actually take up the accordion in the middle of these programs. So I hope these things continue. But of course, like the world is changing so fast and so rapidly, and the various mediums by which we access the music are, you know, undergoing radical change, as is this, for example. So I hope it does. I mean, for me, it was a wonderful thing to be able to view those, and the archival value of those television programs that Tony McMahon did, like, is huge. You know, really incredible to have them now. You know,
and that leads pretty perfectly into another question here on YouTube. And it says, "Hi Martin, I know traditional musicians won't put music on Spotify because of its low rate of pay for artists, and like how it makes traditional music accessible. Maybe you talk about other platforms and how it makes music accessible. What's your opinion?"
You know, I mean, like, I'm a full-time musician, of course. Like, so the revenue models, you know, for music, like on Spotify, are pretty terrible, and YouTube, and God knows where else, you know. But there is actually an EU directive on this that at some point I hope will be implemented, where they're trying to rectify these discrepancies that are out there. But I mean, like on another level, then one has to examine whether it's more valuable to have music out there or not. And I tend to fall into that camp. I would rather just put it out there no matter what, you know, because when I started out recording music, I didn't ever expect to make a penny from it, and now I've adjusted to the fact that I won't. So it's fine. You know, I mean, how I used to think about it actually was it was a kind of something that supported me in doing live concerts. In other words, it attracted audience and got people interested, and I could turn up and do gigs. Which of course leaves us in a pretty bare situation at the moment, which means like there's neither revenues from recordings nor from live concerts. But anyway, we're surviving one way or another. So yeah, I mean, look at and people have gotten used to hearing things and not having to pay for them now, I suppose. So I think it's pretty hard to put the cork back on that one, you know. But we'll see. I mean, basically, people under the age of 30 and 35. I've never paid for music, you know.
Yeah, it's like that Gillian Welch song, "Everything is Free." She wrote it about 10 or 15 years ago when downloading just became really...
Oh, yeah, well, she should have waited. It would be a big hit that she'd never get paid for. Yeah.
But Do you want to come in there, Liam?
We might have time just for one or two last questions, and before we might coax you to play a tune for us as well, Martin. I'm sure
yeah,
people are
sure.
hear a tune at some stage. I'd just like to thank you as well for your generosity of spirit as always. You know, I recall being very young, I think 4 or 5 or maybe 6 years of age, and 9 years ago, and yourself and your father were playing, and we're very. There was a gang of us young kids trying to play. We were full of the Wabisabi at that stage, full of imperfections at least. We're struggling with tin whistles and bowrons and all the rest. But I remember yourself and your father being very gracious and generous with your encouragement to us at that time as well. And it's great that you're sharing all your insights and thoughts and intellect with the audience here. Remind me of when there was a quote by Picasso. I think he said it took him 4 years to paint like Raphael, but his whole lifetime to play like a child. And you know, embracing those imperfections and yet, you know, is something very. You know, I'll be thinking of this on my way home this evening. But
Well, yeah, it's a bit like I often thought, you know, the concept of found art. You know, my feeling growing up was that like this art was actually kind of strewn around. You know, there it was. You know, up and down these avenues and roadways, and in these, you know, there were musicians. So it looked like a kind of a found art. You know, like, you know, like it can be nothing or it can be the universe, depending on how you look at it. You know. And it can be just scratchy old fiddle playing, like with somebody who doesn't know how to play the instrument properly, or it can contain a universe of value and information, you know, depending on how you decide to look at this. And so it's you know, like, you know, in a sense, I mean, one of the things I think that is happening with this, where we're moving into this archival world and we're moving into this interconnected media world, is that traditional Irish music is something that probably, if it has enough roots and connection for a kid in County Clare now to learn the music and to connect with the deeper elements of it, it is equally accessible to a kid from Japan or Brazil. And I think that the future of traditional music here, of Irish music, will be in that expanded universe where people are, you know what I mean? Like, I was looking at YouTube there one night and I saw a Cayley band and set dancers, like having a wonderful night, like, and they were sweating, they were dancing the Clare set and whatnot, except everybody was Japanese and this was all happening in Japan. And it looked completely like what I knew a Cayley to be, you know. And I was going, this is amazing, you know, like there's more than just tunes being transmitted here. There are cultural values being transmitted. There are there's an array of kind of social information, I suppose, that's, you know, is being expressed in a way that I could never have imagined. And so I have this feeling that traditional Irish music, like other music forms such as reggae or other things, will truly become international art forms. You know, like, and I think its survival into the future will kind of depend on that. It's a bit like Elon Musk, you know, imagining that we need to inhabit like various other planets for human civilization to survive thousands of years forward. In a certain sense, you know, looking a little more near term and less ambitious, Irish music will actually have to survive in a more global environment as well, you know, like not just in terms of audiences and being able to go on tour, but in terms of people being drawn to it, playing it and connecting with it. I mean, it's already happening anyway, you know, but like having these archives and having online access to all this, there's a significant asset to that kind of future.
Yeah. And we're to echo that as well. You know, we're seeing that in our in Google Analytics and all the rest. That, you know, we would have maybe 60% of our online audience are outside of Ireland, and a growing proportion in non-English speaking countries as well. So I kind of liken it to the growth in Irish traditional music and practitioners seeking, you know, the real deal and looking to go deep into a tradition, you know. we're noticing big increases there, and I think we couldn't be in danger of taking things for granted in Ireland, that we have a continuous tradition of music. You know, it's not every country has that continual oral living tradition. It doesn't need a very significant revival. But it's a bit like the journey that yoga underwent, 20 years ago. That if someone told you, one of the most popular pastimes in Dublin on a Tuesday or Wednesday evening is yoga, that people mightn't have believed it, but in Irish music might be at the early stages of an international kind of a growth in that regard.
I mean, it occupies a place in the musical spectrum, I mean, you touched on one important point there, which is the idea of continuous, unbroken tradition. And secondly, I think apart from that was the diverse richness, like the variety of instruments, the variety of regional styles, of individual styles, of instrumentation. All of that has given, I think, to use the term biodiversity, has given us enough to feed something that can be very creative and very diverse. So I think from that point of view, like Irish music is in a very strong position, and I think like that for people coming from the outside, they can now access this, and I think it gives them as valid an in as it does anybody.
That's very, very insightful, Alan. I think we are going to have to wrap up soon if we want to get a tune from Martin as well before we finish. I'd just like to thank this series is funded primarily by the Arts Council of Ireland, who are very flexible with how they facilitate massive changes in our planning here in the Irish Traditional Music Archive in light of COVID. It's a series we hope to continue regardless, as well, drawing from the well. And a lot of this, each artist's engagement with the archive will be hosted on our website, so you can access them and access any of our resources that we've spoken about. They're freely available. Alan, is there an outstanding question there? Something that jumps out for you?
Well, just a question that came in a little earlier that it was, would like to find it now. It's just the recordings that Martin played as part of his video, are they available online, or if so, where can we access them? Thanks for the film, just a joy to listen to. And a number of the recordings which featured in Martin's video can be found in ITMA. We'll be posting a blog on the ITMA website to accompany Martin's Drawn from the Well presentation, and we will include some of those recordings, recorded Junior Krahen, Martin Rochford, and they'll be up on our website. And then when we have recordings in here, people like John Naughton, and they'll all be available to the public when we reopen again, but a selection of recordings in Martin's video will be up on our website in the Drawn from the Well blog. Just a couple of comments then maybe to finish off is, hi Martin, nice to hear you. I had been listening to your beautiful fiddle when you came to Italy in Liguria to play with the Birkin Tree many years ago. And that's from Angelo Camera. And then there is Martin Donoghue. This is a window into pure drop of tradition. Congratulations to Itma and Master Hayes. And then Tom on YouTube. Great stuff. Great show. Lovely to hear some interesting discussions around the music. And I think...
before we finish up as well, Martin, would you be able to tell people a little bit about where they can follow your online activities and some of your master classes and some of your free resources as well on your own website?
Oh yeah, well yeah. I mean, like since the pandemic came, I kind of went online, and been trying to learn how to film things. Actually, as I was watching the video there, I learned something as well, which was that I dropped down the resolution rate to send it to you to make it efficient. But actually, when you put a drop-down resolution into another drop-down resolution, that's when you get the little stoppages there, which I was going, I understand it now. A bit too late to fix it, but anyway. So what I've been doing is I've been doing master classes. So I film, maybe a 30-minute masterclass every month, and I put it up on the Patreon website, and I do some one-on-one tutoring as well, and that kind of thing. So that's on what is it? Martin Hayes /patreon.com. I think that's it. Anyway, but if somebody is interested in that, that's what I've been doing. So I just felt like it was something I could do online, as opposed to trying to play concerts which don't sound like concerts or look like concerts or feel like concerts. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll just share something else, or at least, and I'm one of those musicians you probably know by now who enjoys to talk about this kind of stuff. So I enjoy the conversation, and I enjoy kind of thinking about it and delving into it quite a bit. So anyway, that's so you can, and there's free tune learning videos on YouTube as well. So you can, I have put up a couple of tunes every month just for people, so they don't have something without having to pay as well. So anyway, so you can do that if you're into that as well.
We'll add the link to our blog as well on the Drawn from the Well. Martin, so thanks so much for your time, your expertise and music, and really appreciate all you do for Irish music and inspiring others. And thanks for giving us an insight into how you get inspiration from archival recordings. Much appreciated. So what will you play for us to lead us out?
Well, I was thinking I might play a few of these old East Clare tunes. There's one from Joe Ban that I got, and then I was thinking I'd play the Green Gown Lass, which was the tune that Martin Rochford had played earlier on, and I might just play my version of that. And I see lots of friends of mine here. I can't say hello to all of you individually, but it's really good to see you, and thanks for tuning in. And yeah, I see you from everywhere. Thanks. And by the way, for my friends who wouldn't know Liam here, Liam is an astonishing fiddle player. One of the best, absolutely. And he made a wonderful recording there. Was it the year before last? Did it come out? But anyway, it's a wonder. You should check out Liam O'Connor. And his father, of course, was a wonderful musician as well. Anyway, delighted that Liam is running the Traditional Music Archive there. He's a very knowledgeable man and a wonderful fiddle player. So I'll play
Thanks,
a couple of reels for you. So here we go. There you are now.
Yeah, excellent. So thanks so much for participating, and thank you all for tuning in and for joining in and asking questions, and hopefully you can send it on to other people who might be interested I think so many of us have a lot to take from what was said and played for us this evening. Okay, Camille Margaret Martin, Slán go fóill.
Thanks, Liam. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye bye.